for a little bit of mace-splaining, and I got to tell you, this one was fun. Mr. Trevor May, that's me, got to be an investigative journalist for the first time since starting to do this job full-time, okay? Something was brought to my attention recently on Discord, and it's that a lot of pitchers' arm angles have dropped, and they are pitchers that are young studs for their teams. Namely, so I'll show you what I mean. My guy Branch Terminal posted this tweet in the Discord recently, and it's like, hey, I know this was after one start, so hey, I know it's been one start, but is any of this stuff significant? And arm angle rising and arm angles falling happen for different reasons, usually. So usually it's attributed to certain things. Usually arm angles dropping can be a sign of something is wrong, a concern of injury, or fatigue. Like, you don't raise your arm up if you're getting tired or you're hurt. You raise your arm up when you're trying to feel something with the ball. You're trying to be on top of it or whatever. So usually arms raising are some sort of mechanical change, and arms lowering could be something else that might be more concerning. So usually I just pay attention to this because this could mean all kinds of stuff. And this was after one major league start. So this is like opening day for all these guys. We got Luzardo, Kikuchi, we got Skeens, Reagans, and Crochet. So this is three young dudes who are all aces for their teams that we, as a baseball whole, believe have a good opportunity to be in the Cy Young case. So what I actually care about is right here, the arm angle fallers, and those are significant numbers, okay? So at first I was like, okay, it's the first start of the year, okay? So things are a little bit wonky. You're going up maybe to some colder weather. That changes things a little bit. You're trying to grip the ball a little bit. You're trying to get the ball to spin differently. Or in Crochet's case, he threw a ton of cutters. When you're throwing cutters, you're trying to get inside the ball a little bit, and your muscle memory is not quite there to throwing full speed. Also, there's adrenaline. There's all kinds of things happening because it's exciting. It's opening day, and it's just a culture shock in a lot of different ways. So sometimes that stuff factors in. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this a couple weeks. We'll see if this stuff kind of evens out, and then if it's even a thing or not. But then something else happened. All right, I was just watching MLB Network one day, and Jake Peavy was up mentioning that Paul Skeens' arm angles has changed a little bit, but they weren't explaining it from his arm angle's going down, what's wrong with him. They were explaining it from he's added 2 new pitches. We talked ad nauseum about this. He added a sinker and a cutter, and all of his arm angles have kind of melded to be about the same for every pitch. Before, he had some variation depending on what pitches you want to throw. So they saw maybe those angles were converging in order to get some tunneling better, or maybe that's something cleaned up in the offseason. What they didn't mention was the fact that all the numbers were low. Like, yes, they converged, but they all went down. Everything went down, not just his fastball, okay? Then, literally that same day, about an hour later, I am scrolling Instagram, and this post pops up from the Velo University on Instagram. Shout out to them for doing this. The lower the slot, the lower the risk. And I was like, what does that mean? Now, there was some more down here in the bottom. It was more technical stuff. But what it did was mention a study that had been released in March that says the lower you drop your arm, the less stress you put on your joints, on your elbow, and on your shoulder. And I was like, So that bodes the question, are these young guys doing this on purpose? Is this the new thing that pitchers are going to be doing? And what I did was I went and actually got that study. I downloaded it. It's public. Actually, I will include the links to these studies in the video that this is going to be eventually. And there's 2 studies that I actually found after following this first one. So let's talk about, the first one was about the arm angles, but the second one was about just generally what mechanical differences make guys healthier. And then I wanted to see, are these guys doing any of this stuff? is this information that they got very recently that they have implemented into their game, because all three of them, the big three, I'll talk about Crochet, we'll talk about Reagan's, and we'll talk about Skeens, they all want to throw more innings. They've all said that explicitly in public. They want to be aces. They want to go for that 200 innings. They want to be the guy that takes the ball game 1 going into October. That's who they want to be. And they all throw hard. And in order to stay healthy, you need to have cleaned up mechanics. And Crochet and Reagan specifically have struggled with injuries in the past where they missed significant amounts of time. Crochet's got the highest ever pay for a guy with as little innings as he had because he was hurt so much. So these guys want to stay healthy. Maybe they're making some of these changes. So let's talk a little bit about the studies. All right. Study number 1 was from Tomek McCutcheon, Jonathan Slowick, and Glenn Feisig. Okay. It was called Mechanical Changes to Help Pitchers Stay Healthy. It was released in February. So this one was actually released first. And it did a bunch of things, but it gets a little complicated. So I'm going to make it I'll tell you in layman's terms as much as I can. This research looks at how different parts of the pitcher's motion, like your trunk tilt, your elbow bend, and your shoulder position, affect the amount of torque or stress on the elbow, which is closely linked to Tommy John. So their goal was, how do these different factors increase or decrease your chance of needing Tommy John eventually? That's a big question that a lot of people in this game are asking these days, right? Here's how they did it, okay? They took a sample size of over 400 pro and college pitchers, 500 actually. That's a big sample size. Basically, pitchers that had kinematics or data on them. There's a thing in Major League stadiums called Hawkeye. I use Simi. There's a bunch of different ones, right? And what it does, and Kinetrax is another one. What it does is it like mocaps your body in real time and gets a bunch of data points on how your body's moving when you're on the mound. And it knows everything about everybody, all the swings. It keeps track of everyone. It's a little creepy if you think about it, but there's a lot of data out there now. A lot of college parks have it now too. So there's a bunch of publicly, or at least privately, they can collect this data from these teams in the spirit of doing this research, and they successfully found some stuff. They measured 21 different ways you move, from swinging your arm and where you are in different points of time and where everything's flexed and extended or whatever. And they used 21 points to find out as much as they could. 11 specific parts of delivery explain 40% of the stress on your elbow, which could be the difference between Tommy John and not Tommy John, okay? The harder you threw, the more, here's what they came up with. Harder you throw, the more stress in your arm. Duh, all right? More shoulder abduction at foot contact. Basically, the higher your arm is when your foot hits the ground, the more likely you are to put more stress in your elbow. The more elbow flexion at foot contact, the more your arm is bent back when your foot hits the ground. That was something I struggled with, right? Yes, you might throw harder, but you are also in danger of getting hurt. Faster knee extension. When your foot hits the ground, how quickly do you push forward? And then your arm has to follow it. Elbow extension. How quickly are you extending your arm? Another thing that you can't really avoid as a pitcher. And more trunk tilt towards your glove. So the more you lean this way, raises your arm up. So you're getting both. You're raising your arm up and you're creating trunk tilt, which creates more torque as well. So that hurts. The more you turn sideways like this, the more your elbow hurts. That's something that I can also attest to. I did do that quite a bit. So they basically said the higher your arm goes, the more you might get hurt, but we don't know how much. So then we had our second study. The second one was done out of Korea, it seems like. Arm slot angles affect elbow, shoulder joint, torque, and elite and college pitchers. Now, they only used a sample size of 70 people, but they wanted to know how much arm angle affects you. So I'm going to lean this way. How much this changes the stress on your elbow and on your shoulder, okay? They wanted to actually like quantify and give you numbers. That if you drop it 10 degrees, you get this much. What they came up with, that for every 10 degrees it drops, you get 5% less torque in your elbow. That is a lot. And that is wildly interesting. So, that doesn't mean you just drop your elbow, right? And that doesn't mean it actually means you drop it like this. It means maybe you stand up taller or whatever. A lot of things can affect your arm angle. But you also get to a point where once you get to sidearm, so like when you're straight out like this, I'll go left-handed. When you're straight out like this is considered 0 degrees. Below this is when velocity starts to disappear. For example, the hardest pitch ever thrown under 0 degrees is by Tim Hill, and it's 91.4 miles an hour. That's the hardest pitch ever thrown under 0. That's crazy. I didn't know Tim Hill had a record either, but that's crazy. So, but in here, you can get a little bit less stress by finding your neutral, where you are neutrally, where the most neutral place your shoulder can be positioned in order to be healthy. Okay. And they found this, and it's really, really well cited. All kinds of stuff went into this. They measured a lot of those same points in space that the original one did, and they found, oh yeah, like let's look at how much the torque actually has changed by our guesstimates and by our equation, and it was the 5%. So if you take these two things into account, there are some places you can look mechanically to see if you are improving. Now let's look at those three guys and see what they're actually doing that is making their shoulder or their arm angle drop, and if they're doing it on purpose. So this is Garrett Crochet. This is 2024. He was 38 degrees, and now he's at 31 degrees, okay? I know based on the little guy, it doesn't look that difference, but here's a little overlay. He is the most egregiously changed. Here's why his arm has actually dropped. And that puts his arm way up there. This is well over 7 degrees, I'll be honest, but like that's a huge difference. So it seems like trunk tilt is the thing that he was worried about in keeping himself healthy. It's funny, if you really look at his arm in relation to his body, it's pretty similar. So if he were standing up at the same angle, the arm angle would be fairly similar. But in the top one, the old one too, his wrist is flexed in like this a little bit. And this other one, he is very neutral. It's all straight. This looks very smooth. This change would be something that Andrew Bailey would say, hey, you want to stay healthy and you want to throw 200 innings, this is the way to do it. And maybe these changes are the reason that the Red Sox are like, we're going to take a chance on this guy because we think he's going to stay healthy because he made some meaningful changes in his arm angle. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. That combined with him throwing more cutters, he's making better decisions, and he's throwing better pitches and strikes. So this has allowed him to do all kinds of stuff. He's more efficient, and he's just as powerful as he was before. But with these new mechanics, with these improved mechanics, stepping across his body, staying over his front leg, staying a little taller, like more upright, not taller, more upright and not tilting as much, can take more stress off his elbow and maybe avoid those elbow injuries moving forward into the future. But what about Paul Skeens? Paul Skeens was 23 degrees last year. He's 18 this year. That's a drop of 8 or 5 degrees. I noticed it when watching him. I'm like, that's lower. He's slightly taller. See, he tilted a little bit last year. That little outline is him in the background. This one's him this year. He's much more upright, and his angle has naturally dropped. He's not trying to drop his arm. His angle has naturally dropped. So I believe that it's the tilt that guys are fixing in order to save their arms, and that this study is something that these guys are being told by their teams or maybe by the academies that they work with in the offseason. So we also have Cole Reagans. Cole Reagans was really high. Look how much tilt there is there. And now he's at 39. But his arm and his shoulder is slightly more upright. Slightly. So he's made a slighter change, and he has actually got more extension too, which has dropped him a little bit as well. But this guy dropped, again, you can see his wrist it's stuck in. Now it's more neutral. So the combination of the looser wrist plus the taller, more upright, better trunk tilt forward is taking stress off these guys' elbows, and we might see them pitch deeper into games. They have better efficiency, and they're throwing just as hard, and they all want to throw an inning. So I would pay attention to this stuff. When you see an arm dropping, see what happens with the hips and the upper body. Especially if you have kids that are learning how to pitch and want to keep their elbow healthy, it seems like there is very, very compelling data that tells us that these are the changes that are going to keep you healthiest the longest. And I think it's incredible. I think it's incredible. And I wouldn't have found this had Instagram not fed it to me, which I also find really interesting. So What do you think? Do you think these guys stay healthy? I'm confident now. I just after reading all this stuff, and it was a little dense. I needed a little bit of help, but interesting nonetheless. So that is mace-splaining. That is why arm angles seem to be lowering and staying low. There is a pitcher who has almost got his arm so far up over his head that it's negative. That is not going to be sustainable. He is going to hurt himself, probably. That's just the way it is. A guy who really actually protected his arm but not his lower body was Tim Lincecum. He was a prime example of mega tilt in order to generate the power he had. And what actually ended up happening was his hips went. So parts are going to wear out if they're not working efficiently. It's all about extension versus contraction. If you can stay in your range of motion more often with the maximized power, the more healthy you're going to stay. That's just the way it goes.